From vassals and castles to mud-soaked rassles, this is Maesterminds! Welcome back, everyone, to Nerdist House of the Dragon podcast. I'm Dan Casey, and once again, we're here to bring you the best roast that Westeros has to offer with our final weekly breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2. Hot D, we hardly knew ye. Episode 8, The Queen Who Ever Was, shows why this show isn't called House of the Dragoon, because it keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time. After last week's Targaryen family barbecue went awry and gave us several new dragon riders, the season finale was, well, nowhere near as explosive, but it did give us a horrifying glimpse of the future in every sense of the word. We're going to dive deep into this episode in just a moment, but first, joining me as always on our small council is Nerdist staff writer, our resident lore master, and someone who is also going off book right now, Michael Walsh.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I was almost late, but I got a ride from a bunch of crazy pirates, so it was good.
Hey, you know, it's you have the swan boats in the Boston area, you get the pirates in the narrow sea. Who can say which is more effective at getting to your final destination? But Mikey, we're going to talk about the pirates, but first I want to talk to you about, without giving anything away in a larger spoiler sense, because we're before the spoiler warning, were your predictions correct for the season finale?
No, because I predicted stuff would happen. So I was way off. I was way off.
Well, some stuff did happen, just maybe not the stuff that I think a lot of us were expecting. But we'll get into that.
I didn't even get my prediction right on what you were going to ask me to start. I thought you were going to ask me if I've ever tasted the flesh of my enemies.
Have you?
I talked about it with my lawyer. He said, do not answer that question.
All right, we'll talk about that more after the spoiler warning. Folks, we're going to break this episode down for you in just a moment. But first, a spoiler warning. If you have not seen House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 8, this is your one and only warning. With that said, book spoilers will be kept to a minimum, but if you haven't seen the episode yet, leave now before you hear something truly shocking.
So you reject the hospitality of my house?
All right, let's get into it, shall we? So, Mikey, you sort of alluded to this already, but let's start where we always do. What were your overall impressions of the episode?
If I told you before the season that the only major battle we would get was Rook's Rest, you would have laughed. It just seemed impossible that that would be the only major battle. I'm really surprised. This episode felt more like almost like a mid-season episode than a season finale.
100%.
I'm just very surprised that we spent so much time doing so little just so that we could get to the precipice of stuff happening. This story, I realize they want 4 seasons out of this. Mm-hmm. I think there's enough there without this stretching.
Absolutely 4 seasons worth of content in what they're adapting. And I think as well, they're trying to it's not just 4 seasons. They want 4 seasons with the actors who are and the characters that people have come to know. As anyone who's read anything in Song of Ice and Fire or watched Game of Thrones knows, no character is really safe. One of your favorites can easily bite the dust. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that a lot of the characters that you've met so far, it's not going to end well for probably most of them. Look, we know the world, it's Westeros, but yeah, this really just kind of dragged things down to a snail's pace, and it made me flash back to the ancient year of when I was in high school. It was, I think, around 2004 when I started watching a little anime called Naruto, and I was obsessed with this show. I was going on forums and finding ways to find the latest episode direct from Japan each and every week, and there was a point where they outstripped the manga. The anime outstripped the source material, and so we were just treated to filler episodes. Now, I'm not saying that what we're getting here are filler episodes, because I do think we get some valuable characterization and they're able to explore things in greater detail. That's the nature of adaptation. But I do think that this season in particular was an exercise in dragging their heels to the extent where it was almost laughable by the end of the season. I was watching with my wife, and she turned to me like, wait, is there not a next time on? I was like, no, that's the season finale. She's like, what? Are you kidding? Okay, sure. I just don't think enough happened. It was like very much like setting the board. This felt like a penultimate episode, or kind of what we expect to see in like the recap in the beginning of what we're going to see in season 3. So I don't know. I was just a little disappointed in that respect. There was some stuff that I liked this episode. I don't want to be completely negative. I was just a little confused because it's stuff did happen this season. It is inaccurate to say things did not happen. I just did not love some of the adaptations, and I was confused by some of the choices. Now, with that said, I've made my peace with the fact that we're sort of going off book, but I'm curious, how do you feel about some of the bigger choices they've made and where we're heading into season 3?
I have sort of come to an acceptance that this show is telling a dramatically different story than the one I expected. That's been kind of a problem for me in certain instances. I've loved it in others. Just last night, the season finale made clear to me that they are telling a fundamentally different story. It's not that they're changing certain specifics or making alterations. It's that the very soul of the story is dramatically different. That's what the big moment from Alicent and Rhaenyra revealed to me. That and honestly, it's kind of a better place to be, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that bothered me earlier in the season that happened in this episode, I just was like, okay, like this is what it is, and I'm just going to have to deal with what it is versus what I think or it should be, or wish, or I should say not even what I think it should be, what I kind of wish it were.
Yeah, and I also want to address, like, I feel in some cases you and I have been accused of being literalists when it comes to the book in terms of how it's being adapted, and I can understand why some folks may say that. It's coming from a place of excitement. It's coming from a place of passion, because it was a really thrilling book to read, and the excitement for seeing that on screen and how it could play out, because I think the text gives a great jumping off point, but then to see, it's like, I don't know, the Olympics are happening right now. So it's like when someone does a really cool flip and then they don't stick the landing. They just like face plant on the mat a little bit. And they recover. It was still a really cool flip, but it wasn't as cool as you were expecting, or you thought it was going to end differently. And I don't know, I guess I'm just, I'm also sort of coming to terms with the fact that, much like the book is told from multiple disparate perspectives, unreliable narrators, competing narratives, trying to see who can write the most accurate or authentic history, this is yet another perspective on this. And there was a line this episode, which we'll talk about later on during the Alicent scene, where Rhaenyra says, "History will paint you as the villain." And I'm like, okay, you know, that is a good reminder that this is what is happening right now to these characters. How we experience it in the novel, in the book, is also told well after the fact from multiple different perspectives being synthesized by someone else. So that in and of itself is a, fictionalized adaptation of actual events, and this is another adaptation. So I'm trying to make my peace with it. I guess I was just more disappointed I was expecting just a more explosive finale, especially the way that things ended in season 1. I just felt that there wasn't the same amount of verve and vigor and oomph and excitement that we had in season 1. But I'm curious, how did this compare to the rest of the season for you? What worked the best this episode for you?
Oh, easy. My favorite character in all of A Song in Ice and Fire, Lord Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, the three-eyed raven, who's really the three-eyed crow in the books. I absolutely lost my mind. Anytime someone goes up to a weirwood tree, I actually thought this scene was just for me. And if you think I'm exaggerating, my wife and we got a custom wedding cake. It was a weirwood tree.
Oh, wow.
I will send
That's
a photo.
incredible.
I will send a photo to Adam so he could put it up for everyone to see, and I'll put it online. I was losing my mind. For those of you who remember the three-eyed raven, he is not even born for another 45 years from this scene.
Oh, wow.
He is considered by many to be a dark sorcerer. He knows everything. He is a great bastard of House Blackwood. Another reason I love House Blackwood. The second Targaryen civil war is between these great bastards who get legitimized on the king's deathbed versus the family members who are already on the throne. Brynden Rivers does not fight with his bastard brothers and sisters. He defends the crown. I think we sort of maybe know why. Part of that was he understood the prophecy about A Song of Ice and Fire and his family's purpose. He eventually gets sent to the wall. He's the Lord Commander. He disappears beyond the wall. We know what becomes of him. He outlives his mortal coil. He becomes part of a tree, and he waits for Bran Stark to show up so he can train him. Brynden Rivers is the best. He's fascinating. I was so happy to see that he plays a role in the story, because he's the one who kind of guides Daemon through this vision, which shows Daemon, hey, you think this is about you. You're just a tiny little part of something much bigger. Here's the real purpose for your family. And we see the dragons dead amongst a lot of bodies. We see Daemon consumed by, it looked like water, but I think somebody said it's actually blood.
It looked like he stepped into blood at first, but then it looked very much like he was drowning in some sort of like inky black water, like not blood, but lit water.
Yeah. And then he sees, Daenerys with her 3 dragons, bringing them back to the world. And then it ends this great note, which is that all of this is only possible if Rhaenyra sits on the Iron Throne. This is what brings him back into the fold. He realizes, my purpose is not to rule. My purpose is to make sure she does, so that our family can stop the White Walkers. And I think another thing that's kind of weird, they said, I saw somebody say that White Walker was actually supposed to be the Night King. I don't think it matters. The point was he saw the army of the dead. Yeah, and knows winter is coming.
I saw someone online comparing the Night King to that one, with just like talking about, it looked like listing all the different potential plastic surgeries that he got. Oh, buccal fat removal, rhinoplasty. I'm just like, oh my, the internet and the fandom for this show remains undefeated. Just incredible stuff. Yeah, I think there was also like the red comet in there. I think we saw a brief glimpse of the red comet. And the thing that really stood out to me, which I want your perspective on, obviously you said that this is Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, guiding Daemon through this. I'm curious. We saw Helaena there at the end, sort of like in the void with Daemon, like this sort of neural network shared by dreamers. Is this how this works? Are they all able to sort of like, is it like Dune where there's the sort of ancestral memory that they can tap into? Is it kind of like the Upside Down and Stranger Things? Is it kind of just like this shared dream space like Teleron Riode from Wheel of Time? I'm curious, what's your perspective on this? Is that actually Helaena there projecting into this same sort of dream space?
I think it's 100% her projecting in there, but I actually had a different read on it. She is a dreamer, and that is something that runs through House Targaryen for centuries. That's why they escaped the doom of Valyria. Daenerys is a dreamer in the books. I took it as Helaena is also a green seer, just like Brynden Rivers. And I believe that this episode showed that Alice Rivers is a green seer herself.
Yeah, because we saw that. We also saw it, not just because that she claims to be several owls in a trench coat, but also because we saw what looked like one of the green men just skittering in the background. That was that was awesome. That was so cool.
If anyone goes to the site, they can find a piece I wrote about the God's Eye and the Isle of Faces during Game of Thrones, when I was desperate for them to go to the Isle of Faces. The Isle of Faces is this mystical island in the middle of the God's Eye. It's right. That's the lake that Harrenhal sits on. When the Children of the Forest and the First Men agreed to end their war, they signed the pact on what is now known as the Isle of Faces, that island. And what they did was, it gets its name because they carved faces into every single werewood tree so that the gods could witness the pact. They then established a sacred religious order known as the Green Men. And if you read the description, it's obvious the Green Men were the Children of the Forest. Green skin, although there is potential that there was some interspecies breeding, but whatever. And some of them have antlers. When Daemon saw that little antler creature, and I think there's a growl you almost hear, very animalistic, that I was like, oh, please, let's this be a sign that House of the Dragon is going to bring us to the Isle of Faces, a place you would think, doesn't everybody go there? No, people try to take boats out and they get pushed back as though there's a special R. Although there are a couple instances in history of people actually making it to the Isle of Faces, including Howland Reed, who becomes so important in the life of Jon Snow.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm very curious if they're going to wind up there next season, just because, for as much as we have sort of ebbed and flowed and our patience has waxed and waned with Daemon's spooky ayahuasca trips at Harrenhal, I think that their willingness to delve into this more sort of like occult, magical dream space type storytelling has me hopeful. And especially when you take into account Helena's prophetic warning to Aemond at the end of the episode. she tells him that, like, she basically says, like, you're going to go to the God's Eye and you're going to die. Like, you're going to be dead. Like, you're gone. And, you know, knowing that it is the lake surrounding Harrenhal, I think that we can extrapolate that. Hopefully, we will wind up with some sort of battle at Harrenhal, but also we'll wind up with some sort of sequence taking place at the God's Eye and at the Isle of Faces, because it'd be great to go into the center of that eyeball.
I will not spoil it, but there is something from Fire and Blood that indicates we will go to the Isle of Faces. I do not think it's a guarantee. I think it's far from a guarantee, especially since they're just kind of making all these changes. But like you said, the one thing I absolutely love about this show, for all of the criticism I give, is they really do embrace the history and the lore. And sometimes I wonder if we could get the first 6 seasons of writing and pacing for Game of Thrones with these showrunners' love of the magic and lore and history, because like you said, they really are willing to lean into it in a way that Benioff and Weiss were not. And, you know, we could say, oh, we wish they had it. You know, it worked for them. It worked. They created the most popular show in the world.
Yes.
But I seeing a little antlered green man running around the Godswood at Harrenhal. Yes, give it to me. Give it to me.
Yeah, that was, I think, far and away the part of the episode most where I sat up in my chair like, oh, what do we have here? It was so satisfying. And yeah, I'm just so curious where that storyline in particular is going to go. And like, I'm glad that stuff is finally happening at Harrenhal. I think that was important. But I think for me, the bigger thing was that we got that final vision was an absolute banger. And like, really, it was just cool to draw that particular through line. Now, a couple details I want to talk about in this. There was a very cool detail that you brought to my attention about the weirwood tree. And what was that, Mikey?
Yeah, the face they carve into that weirwood tree is the face of George R.R. Martin.
That's such a cool Easter egg.
Yeah, that's. I volunteer as tribute if they have any more weirwood trees. They have to.
Right?
Future seasons.
Yeah, they finally learned to stick with fan favorite heads, unlike the first season of Game of Thrones where they had to apologize to George W. Bush, which feels like a lifetime ago. You know, that Texan painter, George W. Bush. Anyway,
for people who don't know, this was before they had their outrageous budget. So Joffrey had put heads on spikes. So they just grabbed whatever heads were around that they could use. And one of them was the head of former President George W. Bush. And nobody thought it was a big deal until people realized what it was. And then it became a very big deal. And I think they deleted that scene, that moment.
They had to
future releases.
They had to cut that out. Yeah, I mean, look, nowhere near as controversial as a Starbucks cup or a water bottle, but look, times have changed. Times have certainly changed. Well, I also want to we're going to talk about what the other stuff that happened at Harrenhal a little bit later on, but I want to go back first. Actually, no, I don't want to go back. I want to talk about, you brought up a very fascinating theory before this episode that some people had about Daenerys in the context of this vision that Daemon has. Mikey, what is this theory?
Some people think that Daenerys appearing with her baby dragons is a sign that she was the prince that was promised from the prophecy. I don't get that at all. It could be true, but if it's true, it's going to be something we only learn from books that are never going to get written. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in the HBO version of these stories because dragons actually didn't do anything to defeat the Night King. The Night King was on the verge of total victory before Arya Stark, who was no dragon blood and wasn't a dragon rider, showed up.
No, that was the House of the Daggerin.
Folks, everybody knows. This is what Dan is like off camera too. This is like.
Yeah, unfortunately, it never turns off. I'm a menace to society. I apologize to my family and loved ones and anyone I've hurt with my wordplay. I got to say, I can see why people would have that takeaway from this. And more so, I could see why the Targaryens might think this. Because they are very much the family that was promised, the stewards of the world, of preserving the peace, of fighting the darkness that is encroaching. Winter is coming, Daemon says in High Valyrian this episode. He's finally been prophecy pilled. And I can see why seeing like their future descendant with these dragons being reborn after such carnage would be seen as so prophetic. We know this to not be true. But I think it's important to put that in context of they think it's true, and they think they have to do whatever they can to bring this about, which I understand and can appreciate. But from a fandom POV, if you've seen Game of Thrones, I don't understand that read on the situation at all. It was very like I loved all the debates and theories over who's going to be Azor Ahai, who's the prince that was promised, and we definitely put out exactly 1 million articles and videos about that back in the day. But I think it was pretty definitively established that it was Jonathan Taylor Snomus. So I don't think that it's going to be Dany. My apologies, and I do hope that maybe it takes maybe these two paths will diverge in a Yellow Kingswood in the novels, and maybe it will wind up being Daenerys, and I look forward to finding out if that is the case come 2075, after Cyber George has finally emerged from his cryogenic chrysalis to unbox his model trains and finish it. I have no proof that he plays with model trains. I love model trains. My dad had them when I was a kid, but he very much, to me, his aesthetic is that of model train conductor, very Bobby Bacalao.
That hat has a model train energy. I mean,
it's the hat specifically. The hat, and he also has a proclivity for suspenders, which just reads to me as sort of someone who is and look, he is driving the train, the narrative train through Westeros. But we're going off the rails here. Let's take things back to a different form of transportation. That is ships, baby. Let's talk about the Navy. Let's talk about that opening sequence and perhaps the silliest plotline this episode, and that is Tyland Lannister and his extended diplomatic mission to the Triarchy. So, Mikey, what were your thoughts about this, and what's the ultimate goal here?
Am I nuts? This felt very out of place for this episode. This felt like not a season finale storyline. This would have really worked well 2 episodes ago. It
felt
maybe
so
spread out.
Goofy. It felt so goofy, and in a way that I'm like, oh, you're introducing all of these characters who will play a big role in season 3, but I don't know. It just felt very, very silly contextually.
Yeah, and in a vacuum, I kind of liked all of it, but in the context of this episode, I didn't like it at all. I did enjoy watching Tyland Lannister, who, could seem very foppish, right? He's this rich boy, but he's really capable, and he's quick on his feet, and he doesn't come across as brave, but he is. If Tyland Lannister wasn't a green supporter, he would be one of my favorite characters. I also, you want to give me a big pile of wild, freewheeling pirates? Let's go. I love it. They were fun. They needed to not be in this episode. They needed to be in previous episodes.
Yeah, I agree. This one felt like, oh yeah, we gotta put a bow on this. We gotta figure out how we're gonna break that blockade for season 3 and beyond. But I will say, if nothing else, I love Jefferson Hall's performance as both Jason and Tyland Lannister. He is just fantastic in this role. He just plays this sort of like simpering, just out of his element, rich boy so well. And when he's like, best you at what? When it winds up being mud wrestling and then having to sing a shanty and then having to snoo with Lohar's dozens of wives, apparently. It was very funny, but it felt like, I agree. It felt out of place for something when the rest of the episode was so self-serious that I didn't quite understand the motivation here. It felt like, oh yeah, we forgot. We kind of had to tie this off and figure this out. So, obviously the ultimate goal of this is to gin up naval support and break through the blockade that is surrounding King's Landing, because we'd eventually have to come to a head because everyone's heading to King's Landing, and that includes the Greens need their naval forces as well. But I don't know. It's just, are we meant to take the Triarchy seriously here? Because they come across as incredibly silly in a way that I think sort of undermines their ferocity. But maybe it's the old switcheroo they're trying to pull here. What did you think, Mikey?
I don't think Tyland agrees to give them the stepstones when he thinks that could lead to his own death. Like he's afraid he's giving up too much. the fact that he's still willing to risk his own neck, literally, tells me that we should take them seriously. If nothing else, it's going to be a big fleet that's going to draw the Valyrian fleet into a conflict which will weaken Rhaenyra. And these are people that are not fighting for them already. So even if they all die, as long as they take out some Valyrians and some Valyrian ships, it's good for the Greens. I will say, I do think it's a little. Where's the dragon support? That's my thought every time during this battle. Like, oh, you've got an army, great. Is there a dragon with them? Because if not, they are susceptible. I want to be as vague as I can here. Think about what it means for everything we know going on in the Narrow Sea. Think about what it means that there is another fleet heading towards Westeros. That's all I'm going to say. You do the work yourself.
Well, I'll do some of the work because they were mentioned by name this episode, I'm pretty sure, and that is the Greyjoys. We've heard rumors of the Red Kraken. Where are he at? What's cracking? Where are the Greyjoys at? I'm curious when we're going to see them. The answer is probably season 3 in some capacity, or maybe in the final episode of the series when he's like, "And I'm here at last, the Red Kraken."
If Dalton Greyjoy is going to show up on this show, why didn't we get a scene or two with him this year? We're talking about them stretching it out and not a lot happening in terms of like battles and whatnot. That's not the issue necessarily. The issue is that we just spent too much time doing stories that did not need that much time. We could have been meeting more characters. I mentioned this before, Jasper Wilde. How come we've never had a scene with him quietly alone talk? Why don't we know? Why don't we even know why he has the nickname Iron Rod, which is a great story?
We only learned this maybe offhand or through subtitles.
Yeah, so let's see Dalton Greyjoy so that if he does factor in later, we know, because even if he doesn't, there are other characters who surely are. They did kind of a good job with this a little bit with Darren, Alicent's other son, Darren. They gave us some information, but that was only recent. They've been talking about Dalton Greyjoy since the beginning of the season.
Speaking of Darren, he's the other son. He's been in Old Town this whole time, just off camera, and he has a dragon, Tessarion. Was that Tessarion that we saw towards the end of the episode with the Hightower host that seemed to be marching towards King's Landing?
Yep, that was him. That was Tessarion. So I guess we've technically seen him because you could kind of see a dragon rider on, obviously. Yeah. They haven't even cast the role yet. But yeah,
Danny
that was
DeVito.
Tessarion.
In a blonde wig.
DH Danny DeVito in a blonde wig.
I would love it. Yeah, just bring him out for anything. It'd be fantastic. I was very excited and curious. I'm like, that kind of looks like the dragon they've mentioned, Chekhov's brother, just off camera. Hopefully we're definitely going to see more of him next season, but what we'll see and what they'll wind up walking into remains to be seen, because things are not going well in King's Landing, to put it lightly. I'm just curious how the Greens seem to be in such disarray ever since the events of Rook's Rest. Like, I understand it created a power vacuum in terms of Aemond swooping in to seize power after trying to commit regicide with his brother. I forgot is it fratricide if it's your brother? I don't remember. No, I think that's your father. Who cares? He basically tried to kill his brother, seized control, and now seems to be ignoring a lot of advice. Or maybe people are just too scared to tell him, as we saw with Iron Rod. People are too scared to tell him these things because he's just now finding out this episode that they smuggled away dozens of Targaryen bastards to go to the family barbecue on Dragonstone. So it makes them feel inept in a certain way, or maybe it's just how like bureaucracy functions in times of transition and upheaval. What was your read on this, Mikey?
I think they're afraid of him, and he's not getting good advice. And even when he does, he doesn't follow it. He also reacts to any problems by tightening his grip on the city, which is just making people hate him more. He's like, no boats in or out. And Iron Rod's like, the people really need that fish. Like, they're starving. He's like, oh, we all got to make sacrifices. He's a warrior, and he would have been a great general, but he's showing why he's not a great ruler. which his own mom agrees with, and says, your reign is nothing but ruinous and destruction.
And she quotes my favorite line from The Matrix, "Not like this. Not like this."
Not like this. Not like this.
I did like that scene overall, though. It was just a nice exercise in contrast where you see Aemond just assuming that, like, well, of course, like, you're my sister, my blood. I know you don't want to do this, but you have to because we're being threatened. You have to hop on your Lisa Frank ass your dragon Dreamfire and help me. And just her unwillingness, because Helena very clearly scared. She just wants to make prophecies and do needlepoint and play with bugs and just not be hated by everyone in the city, which is understandable. But I think Aemond sort of is coming apart at the seams a little bit here, and that really, I did love the scene with Aemond and Helena at the end, because it was awesome to see Helena stand up for herself, because she's overlooked by pretty much everyone when she has this powerful ability and has accurately foretold everything that's happening, and to see her sort of stand her ground like that against someone who is threatening her life, it was really awesome, because I think that she's been sort of pushed aside or just is seen as kind of like a bit of a milquetoast. I'm curious, what was your thoughts, Mikey?
Yeah, she found her voice, right? I mean, she finds her voice here, and if I were Aemond, I would be very, very worried about what she told him. It wasn't just that, first she lets him know. She knows what's up. I saw it, right? I saw you burn our brother and let him fall. Like, she doesn't say, I know it, right? Because you could say, I know it, and what you're saying is it's a gut feeling that I know to be true. No, I saw it. And let me tell you some other things I saw. You vanishing beneath the water, never to be seen again. This was a very good scene. I do hope it leads to Aemond becoming a little bit more interesting. I think that this season he's been a little too one note, and I think his sister giving him a prophecy about his own death, and that their brother is going to return to the Iron Throne. I thought that was really good, and I hope it does something to Aemond to shake his confidence and give him a little bit more complexity.
I think it certainly will, because it already did in this scene. You saw by the end of it, he was just like resorting to the only structure he knows, which is violence. That's the only way he knows how to get what he wants, which is just through like force or threats. And when she, like the person he should probably be able to walk over the most, is completely unfazed and in fact is like foretelling his doom, yeah, he seems pretty shaken to his core. I also loved the detail about her. She subtly references that Aegon has escaped with Larys, because she says, oh, he sits on a wooden throne now, referring to the weird cart that he's in escaping the city, which I just love that detail. I love all of her. I love anytime the show delves into prophecy and the occult and just weird stuff like that. So I'm always happy when we get some additional moments with Helena that aren't marked by abject tragedy, which, being that the show is what it is, there aren't that many of them. But speaking of characters that you're not excited to see when they pop up, let's depart King's Landing for a moment and talk about our boy, Criston Cole, who has a bit of an uncomfortable conversation and confrontation at sword point with his lover's brother from another mother, Gwaine Hightower.
I felt like there was a scene missing here about how Gwaine suddenly just knows about Cole sleeping with his sister. Just because he had her favor, that doesn't indicate an intimate relationship. Women, ladies of the realm, give their favor to knights all the time. It's more a symbol of like respect both ways. It doesn't indicate a sexual relationship. So I don't quite understand what happened there. I don't know if you had any theories.
Yeah, so to me, I think the focus on him not just holding her favor, but like smelling it, giving it a long huff. It's probably not the first time he's done that in full view of everyone, and I'm sure people start talking. Also, Gwaine is a rich boy, but he's also the son of Otto Hightower, who is nobody's fool. I'm sure that Otto knew what was going on, and I'm sure that there's gossip in King's Landing about what's going on. So I would assume that, yes, there probably was a scene they maybe filmed where maybe he overheard or someone mentioned it to him, but I would assume that he's heard enough rumors and then seeing this for probably the umpteenth time when everyone's just afraid and their nerves are frayed and they're fearing for their lives was enough to push him over the edge to be like, I know that you are banging my sister. I know it. And like, you would not be sniffing this. You would not be sniffing this favor if it was not the case. Maybe he's just just a nose guy.
How bad do you think it smells marching in the equivalent of the Middle Ages, right? Like, wouldn't you be smelling anything that could get you a brief respite from that stench?
As someone with no sense of smell, I think the Middle Ages would be totally fine to exist in, and I have no thoughts on the matter. So yeah, I think that to me, this is deepest fiction, impenetrable stuff. I can't even wrap my head around it. But yeah, no, it was an interesting conversation that then devolved into seeing just how doom-pilled that Criston Cole has become, just talking about how his philosophy is about as bleak as it gets. What are your thoughts on where we find these characters and the host of this army? Because these are the people who are just sort of like traumatized by what they've seen at Rook's Rest and now have to just perpetuate more death and destruction.
Yeah, Fabian Frankel is so good. He is just so good. And what he's great at doing is almost for a brief second making it seem like Cole has a soul. And I love the fact that the show has him sort of being like this philosopher poet here, right? He's speaking like the things he's saying are really kind of like elegant and kind of beautiful. But if you actually think about what he's saying, he's still the world's biggest hypocrite, right? Like, maybe the other Kingsguard do keep their vows, or maybe there's no such thing as true honor, right? And we're all like, he simply cannot take responsibility for his actions. He wants to say, oh sure, what I did is bad, don't think I don't have shame. The problem is maybe everybody has an equal amount of shame, and therefore I don't have any. Like, he's, and by the way, people see through this, I know, because I get messages anytime Criston Cole does something terrible. People just inundate me like, can you believe this guy? I hate this guy. What a hypocrite. I mean, yeah, he is. And once again, that's why he's such a great villain, because this is who he chooses to be. Criston Cole can see what it would mean to have honor, to be noble, to be ethical, to be a good person. And instead he's like, dang, those women, they sure be pretty. Like,
I'd like to say he went from boy to find out boy, but I think he'd already found out. I think he knew all along. Maybe going back to Rhaenyra when she broke his heart the first time and did not agree to abandon her birthright and her
sell oranges.
Yeah, exactly. Go to across the narrow sea, and he's just like, all right, I shall become the worst person to ever live. Yeah, it was. I appreciate the perspective that he offers, though, in terms of just seeing firsthand the destruction that dragons can wreak at Rook's Rest. I think it's very important that he has that perspective, because they really play up just how much the realm will suffer when the dragons dance. And I think that we've seen that a little bit so far this season, but I think to have someone as high ranking in their organization as Criston Cole publicly espouse this perspective, I think it's very important and a cool way to sort of ground the narrative and just remind us that, like, yeah, dragons, awesome to see, but also just sort of horrifying in their implications, which we'll probably see more next season. And I know dragon battles are expensive, but we didn't get to see, well, maybe I'm wrong. We did see a fair amount of dragons being pretty gnarly this season, just from eating people to flambeing them to just bleeding on them and melting their flesh, sloughing off. Like, yeah, it was pretty dark. But speaking of pretty dark, I've been rambling, but let's go to someone we haven't heard from a while. And that is someone who seems to be in the dungeons, folks. Our Otto Watch is over because we found him. We found our boy. Otto Hightower is in the dungeons. And do you think he's at the dungeons in King's Landing, right? That's the implication there?
I think I have I went real deep on the site about this. My best guess, I don't think it's a guarantee. My best guess is that, yes, he is locked up somewhere in King's Landing. Although I wouldn't be totally surprised if he's locked up on a boat near King's Landing.
Interesting.
Or, listen, there are lots of suspects. It depends on if he ever left King's Landing at the site. I explained why I think the most likely candidate is that Massaria had him kidnapped and locked up.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That would be quite the plot twist.
Listen, I want you guys to go to the site and read the piece, but the real quick version is that he wanted to go to Old Town. His daughter wanted him to go to Highgarden. She doesn't even know where he was going. The easiest explanation for why she doesn't know where he was going was because he never went there. That somebody who knew something going on used it as an opportunity to take them. Who has the means to know secrets, who has the means to take somebody because they have a bunch of allies in the city, including the City Watch, who hate the Hightowers, and who also personally hates Otto Hightower the most, Massaria the White Worm, who had her house burned down by Otto Hightower. I think she's the most likely candidate, but no matter who took him, we are now on Otto search.
Yeah, where will Otto wind up? Well, Otto watch this
search.
space, and you will find out in probably 1 to 2 business years. I hope it's sooner than 2 years. Hopefully they're going to speed things up a little bit, because the delay between shows is just going to break my heart. Although I did love the tease we got in the trailer before the episode, Dunk and Egg, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. If you haven't read those short stories, I highly recommend reading them. They are super
read
fun.
them.
And if you're an audiobook fan, they're narrated by the great Simon Vance, who really brings them to life in vivid fashion. Highly recommend it. Dunk the Lunk, thick as a castle wall. I cannot wait to see him. The guy they got to play him is appropriately proportioned. I was very excited.
My special boys. I love them so much.
Yeah.
I love Sir Duncan the Tall. I love Egg. I'm so excited. And I was actually surprised. It seems like they filmed way more than I would have expected by them, since they just started like a month ago. But yeah, we can. I hope we get a chance to talk about Dunk and Egg in great detail in the future.
Yeah, we will go deep into the world of Dunk and Egg in a future episode of this show. But for
Dan,
now, yes,
Dan, I you know what? I did have the thought. We see Bloodraven in the vision. Is that going to be the actor who plays him on the Dunk and Egg show?
Interesting.
Because he is a very important person in the world during the time of Dunk and Egg. And he is a significant character in 2 out of the 3 novellas.
That would be, you know what? I would be pretty stoked if that was the case. That would be a very cool way to seed this and reward people for watching. I would not be surprised if it was just sort of a random person that they're like, hey, you know what? You look appropriately Brendan-esque. So you look like that you would sit in a tree forever. So why don't we just cast you? I don't know. But also Game of Thrones and has no problem with recasting people. See also Daria Naharis. But we'll see what happens. But that would be an extremely cool connection to that show. But let's talk about another character who is youthful and important right now, and that is Jace. And we get a really interesting sequence with Jace this episode where he walks in on 2 of the new Dragon Riders, and that is Ulf and Hugh. And he has a confrontation, and I guess rightly so, because Ulf is just being just an unspeakable asshole this entire episode. And what's your take on this, Mikey? What's your take on Jace's POV? What's your take on how he comports himself? And what's your take on what we see from Ulf and Hugh?
I think, and this is how I felt last week too, but even more so, I just think they've gone too far with Ulf. I just think it's buffoonery to a silly degree. I understand him being uncouth. I understand somebody who grew up being like, I should be up at the Red Keep, instead I'm poor. And I'm down here and I'm struggling, all of a sudden being like, yes, I have found my place. But it's a fine line between showing that and just kind of coming across as a silly stock character. And that's kind of how it came across to me.
Yeah, it's I kind of go back and forth, because they really played him as this person who was kind of like unsure of himself and just using rumors that he wasn't even quite sure about himself to scam free drinks and like eke out a living in Flea Bottom. And now he is ostensibly on the same level as the Targaryens, as these godlike people. He has a dragon. He can do what they can. He has Targaryen blood. What makes him any worse than anyone else in this room? And I can see how that would maybe fill him with a sense of like power and arrogance. And it's just, maybe it's just a rapid shift to that, like, oh, you know what? Who cares? Like, I've got a dragon. Like, I'm just as good as the rest of you. In fact, I may be even better than everyone else because I can do all of this. And like, I'm so powerful now. And I think that power has gone to his head extremely quickly. But it also kind of, you see some interesting dynamics. You see Adam and Hugh both sort of towing the line and being respectful and showing deference to Rhaenyra and Jace. Ulf is not that person. Ulf doesn't care because he has no structure for it. He's just popping off at the hip about rumors he's heard about Jace being a bastard.
He's referencing Jace being a bastard. Like, how stupid can you be? Like, just think that. The funny thing is, like, Ulf says one thing that I really agree with. He's like, you'd all really benefit from a sense of humor. Like, he's correct. He's correct. I don't know, like, wouldn't you still be a little deferential to the literal queen? Like,
you'd think, but Ulf is also, he's kind of a foolish guy. He's clearly ruled by whim, and like this newfound power has gone to his head almost instantaneously, where he just feels entitled to everything now. And I think it's important that they show this dynamic because, people like Ulf and Adam showing deference. Yes, for now. What happens? Like, Ulf is like, oh, the lines between the powerful and the weak are not as defined as I thought they were. If I can claim a dragon, like a knight, maybe he's going to wind up wanting more in the future. And it kind of lays that path out for me in a way that I'm like, okay, I think maybe they are playing the long game here, trying to seed that. Oh, Jace does
dragon
have
seed.
A point. Yeah, they're trying to dragon seed things. Thank you. Jace maybe has a point in perhaps less classist terms that these are not people who are raised in the same world and they don't have the same values as Rhaenyra and Jace and the Targaryens because they have different priorities. Their hierarchy of needs is so different because they're not being met. So I think it's important to show that Ulf is kind of like, there's a crack in their master plan. Like, yeah, you can recruit him, but he's a bit of a wild card. And what if he decides that he is better than the people who have raised him up? What then? And that's going to be something we'll have to reckon with in season 3 and beyond.
And that's a great point because we see it with Hugh too, right? Rhaenyra says we're gonna burn Old Town and Lannisport. These are the two biggest cities supporting Aegon. Old Town is the Hightowers, Lannisport is the Lannisters. They are full greens, and he was like, "Where you want us to go and burn innocent people, right?" And kinda, this is war. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm just saying this is the type of thing you should have expected when you came into service as a dragon rider. But this episode, I think this episode with its ups and downs was very, very fitting for this season. And one thing that was also fitting was Rhaenyra not being very good at this, because only after she gives strangers the greatest power in the world is she like, oh boy, we don't know anything about these guys. I hope they're okay. This is the kind of conversation you have before. And you were asking about Jace, like, is Jace being whiny? Yes and no. He's got some points, but it's coming from a selfish place, a personal place, even if it's justified. What I would say is just win the war. Win the war and figure everything else after. This is actually kind of how I felt when Tyland gave up the Stepstones. Give up the Stepstones for now. Win the war, and then you could deal with this mess, right? Jace, win the war, get your mother on the Iron Throne, be named the heir, figure out the rest of the stuff later. But you do need to know who you're giving a dragon to before you give them a dragon. That seems like basic stuff.
Yeah, you think there would be a baseline level of vetting, but I guess that when you need positions filled ASAP, they didn't have time to hire headhunters and recruiters beyond people to literally round up all the Targaryen people with drops of Targaryen blood and ship them on a boat off to Dragonstone. And that, that's, yes.
Then, right? But then, talk about her being bad at this. Her and Jace screw this up after the fact. Okay, you're right. We're just going to have 100 blonde white-haired people show up, and hopefully 2 of them take a dragon. Great. Once they do, you have to bring them into the fold. You really have to embrace them and explain to them what's going on.
Yeah,
right.
Make it feel special.
And Jace at the end he calls him friend. Right? No, you have to do that before you get to this point. You have to explain to them, and then even if I almost wanted to pull my hair out. She's like, serve me well and I'll name you Knights of the Seven Kingdom. Ooh, you guys going to give me knights. You're dragon riders and people call you sir. I mean, what is that going to do? You got hedge knights walking around with nothing on their, nothing but their sword. What kind of offer is this?
Like, you at least promise a lordship, Rhaenyra. But then again, Rhaenyra as well just showed that it's interesting because she starts this episode once again, just making perhaps the worst possible decision because, she grew up in a time of peace, but she's like, oh, well, talking to Corlys, I hoped that having these 3 new dragon riders would just be enough of a deterrent to reach a state of détente so we could just have peace now and they would give me the throne. Or not even that, just avoid war, but like, you're still in this stalemate without the throne. And Corlys has to very politely be like, I think you need to murder a bunch of people and do some war crimes if you want to sit on this throne. If you want to sit on the pointy chair, you have to do some war crimes. And it's true. She does. But it was just kind of shocking to see. But then she sort of gets the message by the end of the episode when she has her reunion with Alicent. And maybe that's her coming to terms with it in real time because she kind of can't believe, along with the rest of us, Rhaenyra is the audience stand-in. She can't believe that Alicent showed up on Dragonstone. I can't believe they would do that again. I can't believe they do a secret reunion twice in one season.
We have to hold off. I can't, we have to hold off on it because I can't.
Yeah, well, okay.
I'll peak too early. I will say this. I love the scene with Corlys where he is very smart and he gives great advice and even says to her, like, Aemond was very arrogant a few days ago and he thought he was in a great position.
Mm-hmm.
And Rhaenyra is in a great position. She has so many great houses who have sworn to her. She has the Valyrian fleet. She has these dragon riders now. She's in this great position. And Corlys is like, don't think because you're in a great position that you are not at risk. You are. And then later on, we see her with her other counselor, Mysaria, who's like, oh, the gods favor you. This is a great sign. Everything's great. Woo. And we see, like, Mysaria is really good at certain things, but she doesn't have experience leading a war or advising a queen in this capacity.
Yeah.
And once you stop recognizing people's strengths and weaknesses, you open yourself up to their weaknesses. I really like that, and I actually hope Corlys Velaryon gets to do even more in season 3.
Yes,
I think that not that he was sidelined. I just wish he had been a bigger focus this year.
No, he spent, I would say, 90% of the season on that one dock set, the shipyard. They're like, we built it. You better believe we're going to use it because look, we spent a lot of money on dragon fights. We'll build out the rest of it next year. I would love to see. I love Corlys Velaryon, one of my favorite characters. I'm a sucker for any sort of like swashbuckling, seafaring sailor in this world, and I want to see more of him. And I'm confident that we will. I will say we did get, ragging on that set a little bit just because we've seen it so many times. One of the best scenes this episode was the confrontation between Corlys Velaryon and Alyn of Hull. Wow, what a barn burner of a monologue from Alyn. That was just phenomenal performance, and you really felt that in your chest, and just really clearly it's nice to sort of just slice through all the BS after we've sort of tiptoed around it all season. Like, oh, who are these mysterious boys that are suddenly important? And why is everyone being weird about them? And just to hear the other side of that and how tough it's been for people like Adam and Alyn to grow up. And like, yeah, it's great that they're getting attention now, but like it is the definition of too little too late. And I just thought it was a phenomenal interaction.
I wish we had even more scenes with Alyn and Adam together.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if we got more of Adam's story, that scene might have hit even more in some ways. Great scene, great acting, and I'm way more than the coming war. I still can't believe we're saying the coming war. I can't believe we're still at this point. But way more than the coming war, I'm actually really interested to see how Corlys Velaryon responds to being called out like this.
Yeah.
You know, he's got 2 boys that he's always ignored. One that he kind of likes, one that he doesn't like. We don't know why he doesn't like Adam. But Adam's now a dragon rider. His other son is like the most reliable sailor he has, who just called him out on all of his bullcrap. And by the way, after his granddaughter just called him out before, you know, she called him out. So there's a lot of people challenging the Sea Snake. And I don't know. Do you feel like the show has kind of hit the point enough of just how like famous and revered he is? I mean, this is the single most successful sailor in the history of Westeros. And I sometimes I feel like maybe we don't totally get that on the show, but this is a big deal. Corlys Velaryon is a big deal. One of the most impressive people that ever came through Westeros during the Targaryen dynasty.
I think they did a better job at establishing his bona fides in season 1. This season, he has been very much just sort of docked in the marina. He's just been kind of chilling. And I get that was part of his story arc. Like, he felt sort of burned by everything that happened, wanted no part of it, but then, you know, they keep dragging him back in for one more voyage. And this time he's voyaging into the heart of the Gullet, the heart of this civil war. And, you know, I'm hopeful that when we see some naval battles next season, we will get the impression and a better understanding of why he's so revered and why he's such an infamous and famous sailor.
The other thing too is, let's just get it out of the way before we get to the even worse stuff. His other granddaughter had one of the silliest storylines I can ever remember. So let's get this straight. A princess was able to just run away from the Vale and her responsibilities and disappear, and nobody came looking for her. Literally days. Days.
Several days at minimum.
At minimum. Like, also that she could find this dragon that she's clearly going to claim. Like, let me say this. If she had got up to Sheep Stealer and the dragon had just burned her alive, this would be a very different show right now. Like, we would be having a very different discussion. I'd be talking about how it's the best thing I ever saw. How much time do we need to spend with her to not even see her get on the dragon? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah, I don't know. It's creating like a false sense of, I don't know. It just creates like a false sense of stakes where it's like, yeah, obviously she's going to claim this dragon, because they have not been as downright cruel in some capacities where if someone's going to get burned alive by a dragon, it's pretty telegraphed. Like, they're not going to do that to Rhaena. They're not going to do that to Rhaena here. I keep swapping them in my head. They're not going to do that to Rhaena here. She's going to get Sheep Stealer. I wish we got more of a close-up or just more of a resolution to that, because it just kind of, it's an ellipses at the end of a sentence where there doesn't need to be one. And I can't believe she also just abandoned those poor babies to walk to Pentos. Just hey kids, see you later.
What's Lady Jane gonna say when Rhaenyra's like, hey, what happened to my niece, the one that was watching my boys? And she's like, oh, so she left the castle and immediately went into the woods, but we didn't look for her.
She took a right, but we did not care.
So we were fine with that. Yeah,
we just went back inside and looked at the moon door and watched the whole thing happen.
It was very silly, and it was poorly done.
Yeah, that to me felt very much like hey, we're spinning our wheels a little bit. We're taking one character's storyline and sort of grafting it onto another character in a way that feels a little bit clumsy, but I understand the motivation to sort of keep it. You want your Targaryen and Valyrian characters, these people that are part of like the main faction, the Black faction, to feel important. And this is a way, I guess, to make her feel more important than she was in the books to a certain degree. But I don't know. It wasn't my favorite.
I'll say this. We have made reference to the fact that they're cutting out a character that we love from Fire and Blood and giving that character storyline to Rhaena. I think that Daemon's vision with the weirwood tree kind of brought into focus why they felt it was okay to cut out Nettles, and because I think they are taking his story down a very different path. The show, I ultimately believe, is going to get to the same conclusion in almost every major way as Fire and Blood. It is just going to get there in dramatically different ways, and I think that's Daemon now knowing about the Song of Ice and Fire, about the White Walkers, I think partially explains why they felt okay cutting Nettles.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. It would feel a bit far adrift and take some of these characters away from where they perhaps need to be to keep things a little bit more focused. The benefit of the book is you can jump all over because, you know, you're jumping through time and you're going back and forth with narrators, and then eventually you're like, but their story's no longer important. Let's go back to this character. But no, let's talk about Daemon since we're on him. Like, we talked about his vision earlier, but let's talk about the big reunion sequence where Rhaenyra ventures to Harrenhal to question Daemon about what his plans are. What were your thoughts on how that played out?
My thoughts are Sir Simon Strong is the best ever.
He does this thing with his hands in the background after Daemon rallies the troops, and he's just like clapping, like the Nicole Kidman clap, and it just cracked me up both times I watched because he's just stoked. He's like, oh, well, this worked out better than I could have imagined.
You know, he's the one who hears Alfred Broom and Daemon in the Godswood, and he alerts Rhaenyra. He has just proven himself to be beyond capable, beyond lovable. He's the best. I hope nothing bad ever happens to him ever. And, you know, that Sir Simon Strong, give it up to him. In terms of Daemon, he left Rhaenyra in episode 2. It took the next 6 episodes for him to simply change his mind. Like, this, I don't hate the storyline. I hate the length of the storyline.
Yeah.
I just don't. We're harping on it, but I think it's fair. They just stretch stuff out. The Harrenhal stuff went on for way too long. I did enjoy, though, the fact that he completely embraced it. You know, he's Alfred Broom. We got to talk about this. Here's a whisper, and he's like, "Did you hear voices?" And Daemon says, "Oh, this place will have you barking at the moon." So you know, by the time Rhaenyra showed up, I think we knew what Daemon had decided. So it wasn't like that was a big mystery.
Exactly. And the whisper was the word traitor. It was very on the nose. And I'm just curious what poor Alfred Broom is going to do now. I do think that Daemon is just going to let this one slide, but sort of hold that over him if it ever comes up again. But I don't think that he's in danger of losing his head anytime soon because they do need him.
He seemed worried though. They're all celebrating. He's like, "Oh, look at him! You're just gonna try."
Wow, I really misread the situation, huh?
Not exactly the most subtle backing away, you know. Like
no, but he's in a big crowd. I did like that sequence overall. I loved how you had Syrax imperiously looming over the top, speaking to Harrenhal's historical weakness from above. You know, you've got all these people kind of at Dragon Point. And it was I liked Rhaenyra raised her voice like, and who do you support? It was a good moment overall, and I think a nice cap for that arc. But again, I wish that we reached that conclusion a little bit sooner. But
so does Willem Blackwood.
Yeah, well, look, I'm sure Willem Blackwood wishes a lot of things, but you know, he paid the price. He paid the iron price because of all of the horrible things that he did, and you know. Daemon at least seemingly made it quick, but that's the beauty of Valyrian steel. But speaking of Valyrian steel, let's steel ourselves now because, Mikey, we now must return to Dragonstone. Her forest quest is over. Her maiden voyage has begun, and she winds up back on Dragonstone. Folks, Alicent Hightower, what's she doing? Why is she here? What did you think of their reunion, Mikey?
Not a long life in the woods. A week ago, she's like, I might never leave. And then this episode, she's right back.
Yeah, the mosquitoes come out. I get it.
I think there are going to be people who absolutely love this scene. I'm not one of them. I don't really hate it the way I did their first ridiculous secret meeting, but that's only because I'm now dead inside. I'm capable. I look. This is the scene that, as much as I don't like it, is actually going to make it easier for me to enjoy the show going forward, because this is what I'm talking about, a fundamental change. It's not about changing specifics of the story. This is a change of the story's soul from Fire and Blood, because in Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra and Alicent are the two major figures of the Dance of the Dragons, and they hate each other even if they once loved each other, and they have all this animosity, but there's one thing that binds them. They are both fiercely loving, protective mothers, and this really frames the story for the both of them. Alicent has all of this justification for wanting her son on the throne that goes beyond her hatred for Rhaenyra personally, beyond the laws of Westeros, is that she doesn't trust Rhaenyra, that Rhaenyra won't just kill all of her kids and grandkids because they pose a challenge, right? So instead of that story about two moms doing everything they can to protect their kids, we now have the worst mother in the history of Westeros. She goes off and she's been reflecting, right, for a few weeks about how terrible a mother she's been. She feels all this guilt, right? Oh, Darren turned out well because he didn't have to deal with me. And her response to all of this is, okay, I'm going to betray my entire family. I'm going to betray all of our allies who supported us. I'm going to let my son Aemond die in battle. And far worse, I'm going to take the son who did not want the crown, who I helped force it upon his head, and I'm going to give him over to Rhaenyra so she can chop off his head in front of all of King's Landing. All so that her and Helena can go off and be free. Just go and live their life, right? I think this, I don't want to say it's a betrayal of the character, because this is a very different character on the show than the book. It just fundamentally changes the story, and I don't actually even think it's necessarily good or bad. How you feel about it is how you feel about it. It's just, I don't want to hear anybody say anymore like, oh, they're giving us the true version of the story. No, they're not. They're telling their own version of the story, and that's fine. And you might love it or you might hate it. It doesn't matter, but it is fundamentally different.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this earlier in the episode. I think the line that for me really helped is Rhaenyra telling Alicent that history will paint you as a villain. They'll talk about you as this sort of like cold, conniving queen. And I think that is somewhat what we get in the book. We do get this person who is a very adept schemer and someone who has all of these plots within plots, but they both do. And their relationship on the show, I love that they have this sort of like deep relationship, and they've explored that in more ways, but I think they've sort of made them feel a little bit ill-equipped for these scenarios rather than rising to the occasion. And, by the end of the episode, we're going to see the reign of terror slowly begin, RHAEN of terror, by the way. And I do want to shout out, I saw Joanna Robinson of the Ringer. They do amazing work over there. She had a really fantastic tweet about how in this season they've previously framed, when we see Alicent, she's framed by like pillars and windows, and she looks like she's boxed in. And Rhaenyra had been sort of framed in more open spaces, overlooking the wide open ocean full of potential and freedom. In the final episode, in the final shot that we get, that's reversed. We see Rhaenyra through this like crosshatch series of scrolls where it looks like that she is like behind, like she's caged in. And we end with Alicent looking at the horizon, feeling free at last because she's finally unburdened herself. So I can appreciate that from a storytelling perspective. And again, Joanna Robinson, amazing catch there. But I think I'm just a little bit disappointed with, I don't know. I think that we've seen Alicent scheming a bit more and playing the Game of Thrones, and maybe she's just reached a conclusion where the only way to win is not to play. But for me, I just want to see a little bit more from Rhaenyra as well, because it just doesn't feel like they've been on equal footing. And I don't know. It just sort of makes them feel a little bit more on the back foot, and I'd like to see them both be more active participants in this. And maybe, who knows, maybe we'll get that next season, because as Rhaenyra says, we're past the point of no return, a son for a son.
Yeah, and that line about, I felt like it was a little meta nod, right? History will judge you. It's the idea that the way the story is not the way. I don't know, like a mom being like, okay, sure, take the Iron Throne, kill both of my sons, maybe kill all of the people who supported my sons. History maybe should judge you as a villain. And you know, and again, as you point out, some people think we're literalists with the book. We're not. The book presents almost everybody in the Dance of the Dragons as a villain. There are very few heroes, and most of the major players are presented as horrible people. And it makes sense. This is a civil war. The most privileged family in the realm fighting over which one of them gets to sit on the Iron Throne, right? Everybody should hate the people who made this happen. This was one of my biggest compliments for season 1, was that it showed Rhaenyra wasn't this monster. But I do think having Alicent so willingly just give up her son's life is really just so dramatic. And again, I'm going to just say this. It might work for you very well, and it might not. The only thing I would say definitively is that this is a radical change that changes the very core of the story, which is fine. They're telling their version of it. I'm more open to it now simply because I feel like they have so dramatically gone in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of made it less about the familial squabble that it started as, this like internecine conflict, and made it more about a battle for the soul and future of the world, because they've really just played up the repeated importance of the Song of Ice and Fire, Aegon's dream. And that's fine. It is just something that was... It gives it more of a through line, perhaps to connect it directly to Game of Thrones years later. But I think in some ways it does a disservice because it doesn't. Obviously, we're going to see Rhaenyra entering battle mode, like I thought we were going to at the end of season 1 when we had that like really determined look on her face. And I can see why Alicent would be like sort of bereft from all of the horror she's experienced, but I don't know, maybe she will have another change of heart and realize that like, oh, maybe what I'm doing is also bad in a different way. I don't know. I'm just curious what her path forward is, because abdicating the city, even if Rhaenyra is like, yeah, I'll let you go, it doesn't protect her or her family. Like, it puts arguably a bigger target on them.
Yeah, and I just don't see what the end plan is here, other than Rhaenyra destroys everyone who supported me, and then she tells all of her supporters to leave me alone. Like, who in the realm is going to be happy with Alicent Hightower after this? Anybody that supported her that is alive will hate her, and all of the people that supported Rhaenyra will hate her. What freedom does she have here? This is, I guess, she has more in common with Kristen Cole right now than she does Rhaenyra. No, she really does, right? Because she kind of just wants to absolve herself in some ways. I know it's not quite as bad, but the funny thing too is, if Alicent just told Rhaenyra about Aegon's injuries, Rhaenyra would probably just let him live. If she finds out why he can't pee without it running down his leg, she might be like, that's a much worse fate than me cutting off your head.
I don't know. I think that she was being accurate and truthful when she said, I can't take the throne while he's still out there. Like, I can't let him go. I have to decapitate him and show his head to everyone to see, like, show them, hey, I'm here. He's gone. We're all good now. It's my chair. It's my pointy chair.
So Dan, are you defending the murder of Rhaegar Targaryen's children 200 years from now?
Look, let's just say that when it comes to the pointy chair, certain sacrifices have to be made. And when you it's a slippery slope.
Oh, is it? Is that?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. No, it's more just in terms of the stakes on this show, in terms of how everyone's made it clear that they will not accept her on the basis of her sex as ruler. Like, there's a big divide in the realm. She has to take a drastic measure to prove, like, okay, well, you'll accept me on the basis of the fact that I cut off the previous guy's head, get in line, or get into the ocean. That's sort of how she is going to come in here, because it's the novel it's adapted from is called Fire and Blood. It's not called Peace and Love. It's not called Olive Branch and Treaty. It is a horrifying tale about horrifying people doing horrifying things, and I think Rhaenyra is finally in that mindset.
You when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Like, this is how it has to go. I get it. The funny thing is, even if she believes Alicent and takes her up on the offer, Aegon's not there anymore.
Yeah, no, he's
so talk about a problem.
He took the last Uber out of King's Landing. He's. I'm curious. Where do you think that they're going? Or you think they're going to head off to Essos?
Yeah, I don't know why we should doubt what Larys said there in terms of where, because he's got to put the money somewhere, and there's no safer place to put Harrenhal's money than the Iron Bank. So you go there. Nobody really gets taken out of Braavos. Braavos is very insular. It's very different from the other free cities from the former Valyrian freehold, because Braavos was made up of escaped slaves from Valyria who specifically chose that location because nobody could find it. It was basically covered. So Braavos is a really good place to hide. Fans of Game of Thrones know it well. Arya spent a lot of time there. Whether or not that's ultimately where they go or ultimately where they end up, it seems unlikely. But I think in that moment, Larys was being honest. But of course, things can change. He might be trying to go to Braavos, but can't get there. There's a whole lot of ships coming.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of ships coming, and that would be quite the tax for them to take. But only time will tell, and I look forward to seeing where they wind up in season 3. But Mikey, much like the show, we've been dragging things out for too long this episode. It's time that we bring things to something of a close. Who was your MVP of the finale episode for House of the Dragon Season 2? All right. Who is your MVP?
I don't know what this means. I think you could give it to Tyland Lannister. I think he's pretty impressive. But you know what? I just want to do it one time. Sir Simon Strong, MVP.
He's my pick. He's my pick because... You can make the argument that so many other people were impactful. Simon Strong had a incredible impact this entire season. He not only tempered Daemon's darker impulses, he managed to get word to Rhaenyra. He has been sort of the only thing, this tenuous cord keeping Daemon tethered to reality as he is sort of losing his grip on things as he goes deeper into the dream world with Alice Rivers. So I do have to give it up to Simon Strong, not just because I love every scene that he's in, but because he is actually he's not just the steward and the castellan of Harrenhal, he's acting as the steward of the realm. He's doing more for the Team Black than basically anybody else.
You could say that he's as responsible as anybody for the Riverlands coming together.
Yeah.
There's no Riverlands army without his guidance. He's like you said, he kind of kept Daemon in check as Daemon was losing his mind.
Yes.
And he's also just a sweet, adorable big teddy bear. I love him so much.
Perhaps, my lord, you should not talk on his grandpa. Yeah, he's fantastic. So MVP of not just this episode, but the season for me. But as we move on, any Easter eggs or moments that fans might have missed or anything that we didn't get to discuss that you want to bring up?
Yeah, when Aegon says he'll be known as the Realm's Delight, he's mocking his half-sister Rhaenyra. That was her nickname as a child when she was so beloved. It then got turned against her as an adult, as in the Realm's Delight. Bloodraven's birthmark, his Weinstein birthmark, is on the wrong cheek. It's on the wrong cheek. It's fine. I'm fine. Why would you even think I'm not fine? I'm fine. We got confirmation Alicent did not cheat on Viserys. She said that she turned to Cole after his death, so good for everybody there except for Kristen Cole. No, I wish bad things happened to him all the time. Aemond burned down Sharp Point. Sharp Point is home of House Bar Aemon in the Crown Lands, and its lord sits on Rhaenyra's Black Council. And finally, Shirako Lohar, the version of the character we got, is actually a combination of two characters, Lohar and a character named Rocalio Rindoon. We know it's a combination because Rindoon is the one with a lot of wives who makes people wrestle in the mud. Lohar is played by Abigail Thorne, who I thought was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I did really appreciate Abigail Thorne's performance there. Definitely. This character came in like a thunderclap, and I think is going to really resonate with a lot of people. Like we said before, I just wish that we saw this whole sequence take place in a previous episode, but we shall see what the future holds for them. I think that sort of covers pretty much all the ground that I wanted to. Anything else that you wanted to discuss here, Mikey? Maester Orwyle getting caught up in everybody's plots. He's sort of the ultimate example of this poor guy who's just caught in the middle of everyone's schemes.
Yeah, I think people go to him because they know he's genuinely a good person. And this is, I was always interested before the show started to see how they would handle him based on Fire and Blood. And I think that the people who write the show got the same impression of him as I did from the book. I also wonder if he is the greatest healer in the history of the realm, because
based on how quickly he's looking a lot better.
Is he doing skin grafts in there?
Yeah.
Because Aegon's birth, these are very new. It's one thing that I don't know. It just seemed like a little bit too fast of an improvement.
I am a little unclear on the timeline this season. In the book, it takes a long time before we even really hear from Aegon again. I understand the need to truncate that, but I'm very curious how much time has elapsed between Rook's Rest and where we end the season. So I'd be curious to delve into that a little bit. It might be a question for us to explore. Something else I wanted to bring up is during that, we alluded to this a little bit, during this final montage, we see all of Westeros marching off to war. We see the Hightower faction with Darren riding Tessarion. We see Jason Lannister leading the Lannister army into Westermen. And most excitingly, at the Twins, at that crossing with House Frey, we see the old graybeards of House Stark.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my old men. I was so excited. It's Lord Craig and Stark saying they'll fight like Northerners. Did you just feel it? Did you just feel like,
oh, yeah,
these old guys are the last people you'd want to see at the battle? It's like, we ain't got no these guys will not they could be dead and they're still going to come after us. I was very amped up for that moment.
Because they truly have nothing to lose. They have no home to go back to because they are marching off to war because they're a drain on their family's resources. That is that is their tradition. It's hey, we give 1 in 10 to the wall, and at a certain point, we send our old people to go do something else because we need the next generation to prosper.
Yeah, Dan's right, by the way. They literally just when winter comes in the north, there's not enough food and resources for everyone to survive. So a lot of them just go okay, bye, we're going to go do something and die or go live someplace else. So these guys getting a chance to fight for their vows is a pretty good way to go, which makes them super dangerous. And Northerners are already very dangerous on a battlefield to begin with.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to see that. As we leave people this episode, do you have any season 3 predictions or anything you're hoping to see in season 3?
Yeah, a lot of battles. I think that we are like I said, I think this version of the story is going to end up at the same place, but I think there are going to be some pretty dramatic changes. I think a lot of characters who should probably already be dead, and if they aren't, should be dead very soon, are going to outlast their book versions by quite a bit. But I do think we're going to probably open the season with maybe at least one major death. I do hope we're not waiting 2 years, though. It's just, I'm sorry. Listen, I get it's a big budget show. I get there's a lot of VFX. That was true of Game of Thrones, and they got their first 7 seasons out in 7 years, and they only took 2 years for the final season because they literally filmed the biggest battle that had ever been put to film. Let's go. Enough's enough. You did 8 episodes, and it took you 2 years, and you had one actual big battle. What are we doing here? I hate this.
I understand that it's expensive, but I hope they will come out of this being hey, we'll do a lighter season this year, but you have to give us an outsized budget for the following season because we can't do a show called House of the Dragon without showing the dragons and the dance of the dragons. We can't just, it felt like such a cop-out to just show Aemond overlooking the ruins of a castle. I think this episode, everyone was expecting at least one major conflict, and we didn't really get that in that sense that we were hoping for. So I agree. I hope they come hot out the gate next season with a major character death, because I think that is something that we need and something that will reassure us that, now no one is safe. It did feel this season like there is a certain degree of plot armor for our major players, and that is not the case in Game of Thrones. That was the lesson that we learned way back in season 1. When the guy on the billboards got his head cut off. And I was like, you can't do that. He's the star of the show. You can't cut off his head, but they did. And that's why I fell in love with the show. And that's why I'm hopeful for what's to come in season 3. So cut off someone's head. I don't care who. Just off with their heads.
Maybe we don't have to cut off any more children's heads. Anybody,
No,
any
no,
adults.
anyone of fighting age. Well, folks,
An annoying teenager.
Yes, or two. On that note, folks, that is all the time we have before I say something that I should not. That is a wrap on our breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 8, and our wrap on House of the Dragon Season 2. Thank you so much for joining us all season long. We sincerely appreciate all of your thoughtful comments. And while you wait for Season 3 as well as the 7 different spin-offs in the works, good news, because we got you covered with plenty of deep dives into Hot D and GOT lore and ASOIAF lore over on Nerdist.com. I think that's the acronym. Anyway, Mikey, where can people find you in the meantime to send you a digital raven?
They can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at BurgerMike, all one word. And of course, they can find me at the greatest website anybody ever created, Nerdist.com. And before we say goodbye for the season, Dan, I just want to thank all of our viewers and listeners. I hope, even when you don't agree with us, that you understand Dan and I really love this. And if you could see the conversations we have off of these end and we keep going and we talk all week and we are excited, and getting to share that excitement with you, even when we don't like stuff, we still are very passionate about it, and we can't do it without you. So thank you all so much.
Of course, we critique the things we love because we love them, and I know that is how many of you feel as well. So, folks, thank you again for tuning in. In the meantime, though, while we wait for Season 3, tell us, what did you think of this episode and this season? What was your favorite moment? What do you think is going to happen in the future? Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com. See you next time.